Hey, what's good, brothers? Welcome back to the Shredding Skeptic, where we're going to talk a little bit today about Ghost Theft Auto Wildlands. And yes, I suppose that is a bit of a play on words based on how this game presents itself, but I'm hoping you guys enjoy this one because this is probably the best game, or I suppose open beta, that I've played in quite some time. So that's also part of the reason why I haven't made a video in quite a while, is there just haven't really been a lot of games that have inspired me to do so. So, today we're going to jump right into this open beta to see what it is that's being offered by the developers at this stage, and if you guys like it, maybe we'll pick this game up on the 10th when it arrives and play it in a little bit more depth. So as you can see from this map here, we have two different provinces that we can operate within, and if we go outside of the boundaries set by this open beta, you have about 15 seconds to get back in before you will be summarily executed by the game. And the parallels to Grand Theft Auto 5, 4, whatever else, will become quite evident as you see the way the open world is laid out. Now, I don't really have a big problem with this because I think the Grand Theft Auto series is probably the definitive standard by which all open world games will be judged, as it does seem to have the best formula. Now, that's certainly open to debate, and if you guys disagree, I'd certainly love to hear from you below. But if you haven't played a Ghost Recon game in a little while, and I can't remember the name of the last one, but it had this same kind of setup where you would use a drone to kind of go around and mark your enemies and develop some sort of a plan for attack. Now, I guess what this throws back to for me is the old Commandos series, and if you guys remember that game, this was before the days of HD gaming where everything was played at a much lower resolution, and the idea was you'd have to get, I don't know, infiltrate something, take out a guy, or destroy something and then get out again. And one of the most effective ways to do that would be to slowly pick off the perimeter of enemies in a reasonably strategic way. Now, this game, you're definitely going to have to follow that strategy because if you get alerted, the game certainly becomes a lot more challenging. And although the shooting system is one of the best I've seen in a game recently, it's definitely not going to be any easier if you choose to go loud a little bit too quickly, because they'll call in reinforcements and all this other stuff. And if you happen to be in one of the harder zones, that's also going to include helicopters, armored vehicles, and all sorts of other nasty stuff you probably want to avoid. So while we take a look at a few of the different gaming elements that are presented in Ghost Recon Wildlands, let's talk a little bit about where the game is set. The game is set in Bolivia, which has enjoyed a few military coups up until about 1982, when the presidents began to start ceding power a little bit more peacefully. And I think that's probably going to be a huge element into determining the stability of a society, is not so much the president themselves, but how readily they're able to cede power to the next president. So this provides a rather colorful backdrop for Ghost Recon Wildlands, which sees the team of four basically drop in out of, different ways of getting into the country. It's a rather interesting intro where they all talk about the different ways they managed to arrive in Bolivia. And the idea is you're basically going in to disrupt cartel activities. There is an RPG-style character creation stage at the beginning where you can make your character look like whatever you want. So, of course, I was able to get my character with that sweet eye scar that runs from above one eye to below, which I always think is an interesting character piece for any protagonist to possess. And each of the characters occasionally makes mention of what life is like back home, like lamenting about how they're going to be missing their son's baseball game or something of that nature. And a few of the lines do feel a little bit contrived, like how whenever you find medals that allow you to gain skill points, the protagonist remarks about how they look like they came from either a Cracker Jack cereal box or from the Air Force. Now, you military guys probably know a little bit more about some of the chirping that goes on between the different branches of the military, so you might find that to be an amusing element of this game. And although the game is mostly played from a third-person perspective, whenever you aim, it defaults to the first-person perspective that you see here, but you can also switch it to a third-person view, which will allow you to have a little bit more situational awareness. It appears that the developers have spent quite a great deal of time really finessing the shooting system so that it feels like you're doing it, but you're also doing it with a higher degree of skill than you might otherwise be capable of. Now, this is a very difficult balance to achieve, and the developers have to use a little bit of trickery in order to make you really feel like the super soldier they're trying to portray in the game. Now, the game does feature a fully functional day-night cycle, so if you were to arrive at a particular mission area, you might have to approach it completely differently during the day than you might have to at night. But fortunately, you do default with some night vision goggles that I don't think the earlier enemies have access to, so you'll find a distinct advantage there against these regular cartel types. Now, you will encounter some rather difficult, more militaristic enemies as you progress to some of the more difficult provinces, but for the beginning of the game it does give you a nice intro before it really throws you into the frying pan. As you can see here, the lockpick mechanism basically involves smashing a big heavy-duty padlock with the butt of your rifle, which may be a little bit amusing to some of you soldiers out there who realize that the butt of your rifle probably wouldn't survive too many of those impacts if you're using it to break locks. Now, it'd be nice if the developers maybe had something a little bit more elegant, like, I don't know, a set of bolt cutters that you could carry around with you or something. But, you know, this is the world we're living in right now. Most of the assault rifles that you start with appear to have 20-round magazines, which I suppose would normally be 30 rounds, but that does come as an upgrade later. Now, the upgrades are essentially found throughout the provinces, and if you're able to, you know, capture a little bit of intel here and there, quite often those locations are revealed to you. So if there's a specific loadout that you're looking for, you will have to go to specific areas in order to find it. Now, the game is pretty transparent about where that stuff lies, so I am hoping once we pick up the full version of this game that I can get the ideal loadout that I'm looking for. Usually what I go for is some sort of a long to medium distance range, and then something a little bit closer in. So I'm thinking maybe the Mark 17 Scar for my medium to long range, and maybe an FNP 90 for a little bit closer in. But I guess we'll see what comes up once the game comes out. The Sync Shot also makes a reappearance in this game from the previous Ghost Recon title, and this is a very, very efficient way of taking down multiple enemies at once, especially if they're in a position to be observing one another, because you may have to take them out simultaneously in order to prevent them from relaying your position to the remainder of the camp. What I found to be the most effective strategy for getting through a lot of these different enemy encampments is to essentially chip away at the enemies from the outside in. So you go for the snipers first that are up high, where taking them out probably won't alert the rest of the camp, and then slowly whittle them down. And, you know, if you get enough of them and you happen to make a mistake, it's probably going to be a lot easier to recover from that if there's only 4 guys left rather than 12. It's not impossible to take them all on, but this game makes it pretty clear that you're going to maintain a serious advantage by maintaining stealth over just going in guns blazing. The mini-map on the bottom right-hand side is also fairly generous with giving away enemy locations, but it does kind of obscure the specificity a little bit by basically making them these giant orange blobs until you've had a chance to specifically look at the enemy with a rifle sight or tag them with your drone. And one of the other things that I like quite a bit about this shooting system is that every shot feels satisfying and effective. This is a welcome redemption from the shooting system in The Division, where essentially the damage taken by the enemy would be determined largely by your stats and their stats, and, well, basically this really ham-fisted attempt at an RPG in a game that it wasn't really well suited for. In Ghost Recon Wildlands, the elements seem to gel together a lot more seamlessly than they did in The Division, where everything you did felt kind of pointless. All of the missions here seem to revolve around the idea of getting the lieutenant you're trying to assassinate to come out of hiding by becoming such a huge pain in his ass that he has no choice but to respond. And the RPG system that they integrate into this involves a lot of technological upgrades to your drone, to your team, to your vehicles, equipment, all that other kind of stuff, where every time you have to spend a point, it really feels like it makes a big impact on the gameplay. Rather than, say, The Division, which we mentioned before was essentially, oh, sweet, a new pair of gloves, a new hat, awesome, this is a great shopping spree. I also love how with this open beta, it really feels like the games did back in the day when we had access to a demo that we could play for free that would let us try out the first couple of levels, maybe a few different gameplay elements to see how we actually liked the game before having to drop an obscene amount of money on it. And I remember when games used to cost about $60 and now they retail, well, with the Canadian dollar and taxes, at around $90. So I'm really hoping I can get about 90 hours worth of gameplay out of this in order to really hit that 1-to-1 ratio that I like to go for. And although most of those hours are going to be spent in stealth mode, sometimes it really helps to just grab an APC with a sweet grenade launcher on the top to just waste your targets like that. There's one of them there. You can essentially just drive around and blast these things from afar with basically limitless ammo. This is also an effective tool for taking out the helicopters that you're going to be encountering along the way. Now, I'm not totally without my reservations about how this game is really going to turn out once it gets released. I suppose my biggest concern is it's going to become repetitive, and it's going to have that same kind of vibe that we got from Grand Theft Auto San Andreas, where you had to go take over all those different territories, and once you saw how little of an effect you had taking over one zone, you just saw the entire grind laid out before you, and thought, oh god, I'm really going to have to spend some hours getting to where I want to get in this game. Now, fortunately, everything that I've played so far has been fairly rewarding from a gameplay standpoint. The controls for the APC could probably be a little bit nicer. It can be a bit of a pain in the ass to drive sometimes, but I'm hoping the developers with this open beta are going to be able to do a few tweaks before the game actually comes out, and maybe get all those day one patch issues resolved so we don't have some crazy kerfuffle like we've had with so many AAA titles in the past, and hopefully this thing just works as intended from the beginning. Now, at this stage, it's probably a good idea to talk to you guys directly about where I think my channel is going to be going in the future. I still do like doing gameplay videos from time to time because I feel I've made some really valuable connections in the YouTube community with a lot of you guys. It's really humbling for me to put up a, 9-minute video and then 9 minutes after it gets released have a comment pop up on there from, Brain Juice or Kazrico. You guys, have supported me so well over the past couple of years that I just feel like if I don't give you guys the kind of content you deserve, I'm just really doing you a disservice. It's pretty humbling to have your videos, create a notification on someone's phone or computer so that as soon as they see it, they click it. It's a really unusual feeling to have, and it's very, very, well, like I said, it's very humbling. So I want to make sure that every time I put up one of these videos, it's going to be something that, you guys are either entertained by or derive value from, or preferably both. Now, the other pathway that I was considering was doing a kind of a podcast, because that's very similar to the way I'm doing these videos now. And I suppose the reason I'm doing gameplay videos is because it's probably a little bit less pressure on me to put up some beautiful gameplay footage than it is to have you sit there and look at my ugly mug while I deliver some kind of pontificating platitudes about life. But then again, it's often the very thing that we're avoiding that is what we most need to pursue. A interesting turn of phrase I heard a little while ago was, if you feel that you can't, then you must. If you feel that you can't, then you must. Now, these words I think have a lot of wisdom in them because I think it's often the thing that we're avoiding the most that is what we most need in order to progress. Now, if you guys have stuck around till this point, you are probably the individual that I am trying to reach the most. And if I have my vision of my target audience right, you're the kind of individual who's probably a little bit more on the introverted side. You probably see things and feel things a little bit more deeply and are searching for a lot of meaning in your life. And I guess the reason I'm trying to reach you as an audience member is because you're probably a lot like me. And I also feel that a lot of the problems that I run into in my life are probably a lot more trivial than the problems that you might run into in your life. And I guess what I want to do is provide you with the kind of value that'll help you navigate those problems, to realize that if your problems aren't necessarily unique, it probably means that other people have been there and have found some way of coping with them. Video games have always been a great escape for me because sometimes it's just easier to focus on a completely different world than the rather unusual and chaotic world that we often find ourselves in. Although I don't have a lot I can really complain about, a lack of complaints doesn't really help one address some of the more fundamental questions of life, such as, how am I supposed to be? Or how should I live my life the most effective way possible? And I'll be honest, I don't really have the answers to these questions because, again, they are some of the most fundamental questions one can ask of themselves. But with that being said, perhaps for the time being what we'll do is we'll focus on that which we enjoy and maybe spend a little bit less time talking about that which we don't. But anyway, brothers, thank you so much for taking the time to tune in and join me today on the Shredding Skeptic. Hope to see you next time.